Thank you for joining Direct Women's webinar on a view from women of color on corporate boards. My name is Kelsey Velma, and I'll be your technical moderator behind the scenes. I am the Director of Programs and Operations here at Direct Women, and I'm excited to be hosting this session. Before we get started, I'd like to run through a few housekeeping notes. You should all be able to see the screen right now and hear my voice. The phone lines, however, are muted, so although all of you can hear me, we cannot hear you. That said, you can still ask questions, and we encourage you to do so. At the top right of your screen is the GoToWebinar panel. Just open the console, find the questions section, type your question, and hit submit. Feel free to submit questions at any time during today's program. Today's webinar will be approximately 1 hour with 45 minutes of content followed by a few minutes for Q&A. Lastly, there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar that we hope you will complete. It is only 4 questions and should take no more than 2 to 3 minutes tops. With that, I will turn it over to the moderator of today's program, Lily Yan Hughes. Lily?
Thank you so much, Kelsey. And we have over 500 of you signed up. And so we're so excited to share this really wonderful insights from our distinguished panel today. So thank you for joining us for our webinar, A View from Women of Color on Corporate Boards. I'm Lily Yan Hughes, and I'll be the moderator for today's program. I'm the Assistant Dean at the Syracuse University College of Law, and before that, I was Chief Legal Officer, Public Storage, Aero Electronics, and some years before that, partner at Manat Phelps, and also had served on the board of Association of Corporate Counsel, but I'm delighted to be presently on the board of Direct Women. And for 15 years, Direct Women has been the focus on its singular mission, which is to increase the representation of women lawyers on corporate boards. Our work includes identifying highly qualified women attorneys and helping them to position themselves for service on boards of major public companies. And through our programming, Direct Women helps to create a pipeline of women attorneys who would be considered very effective leaders on boards. And we also serve as a resource for companies who are looking for very qualified women legal leaders. So I'm so pleased Joanne Epps, Maria Huber, Mary Smith are joining us today. Joanne is Senior Advisor to the President and Professor of Law at Temple University, and she's the Director on Corporate Boards of Gaming and Leisure Properties, Inc., as well as PRE. Welcome, Joanne.
Thank you.
Marie is Chief Legal Officer of eBay. She is also a 2014 alumna of the Direct Women Board Institute. Thank you, Marie. And she's a director on corporate boards of Portland General Electric, as well as Avenida ASA. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you.
And Mary is Vice Chair of Venn Group. She is a member of Direct Women's 2022 Board Institute. We welcome you, Mary, in New York City in October for the Board Institute. She is also a corporate director on the boards of PTC Therapeutics, Inc., and she is the president-elect of the American Bar Association. So welcome to all of you. And we'll start with just setting the stage. So I'm going to start with Mary, and then Marie, and then Joanne, for them to each give a brief description of how each of you landed your first board position. What are some of the key steps that you took in order to get on that board? And then can you share with our audience today if there are certain things that you did or different background that really was instrumental in your success in getting that first board seat? In other words, are there other mentors or sponsors, affinity groups, and programs that are focused on advancing diversity or other types of involvement that you have been involved in that you benefited, which help you get that board seat, the first one as well as your subsequent? So I'll start with Mary.
Well, thanks everyone. It's great to be here today. This is such a great topic, and I'm so pleased to be with my esteemed co-panelists. Well, a few years back, I really wanted to get on a corporate board, and I was actually very intentional about it. I think there's probably a few people who are CEOs or CFOs of major companies where they're getting invitations to join boards. I think for the rest of us, you really have to network a lot and reach out. So I actually started joining a lot of organizations that are geared toward getting on boards, like National Association of Corporate Directors. That's why I'm involved in Direct Women, which is a great program for women lawyers. And there are a number of organizations for different types of women and people of color as well, like Latino corporate directors, Executive Leadership Council. And I started networking with the people that I knew, attending programs in some of those organizations. And then I think the other thing that we will probably talk more about later too is you really need to develop a board bio. It's different than your normal bio because you need to cater toward what boards are looking for. There's certain attributes and skills that boards are typically looking for. And then the other thing that I did, I actually ended up working with a couple of coaches, and I think that was really helpful to me. I guess the thing for me was I didn't want to look back and say, oh, what if I had done X, Y, or Z? Maybe I would have gotten on a board. I wanted to do everything I possibly could, and it was a lengthy process. It took about 3 years, and then as it turned out, I got on 2 boards at the same time. One, a private board, which I just applied blindly to an opening. And then the other board, PTC Therapeutics, I got on is through a networking contact of mine. So.
Great. We'll dig into some of those organizations and how did you cultivate those networks, that led to you being outreached and ultimately successful. So next we're going to go to Marie, and can you share a little bit about your journey? And I think your journey is slightly different, but I think it's really reflective of, I think, ultimately some of the practical takeaways that I know our audience hopefully will bring home for them as they look for corporate boards.
Thanks, Lily, and honored to be with you and Joanne and Mary, and thanks to Direct Women. My path to corporate boards was, I would say, not as organized and intentional as Mary's. I love you. I love the tips you're providing, Mary. I took maybe a little bit of a, I guess I call informal or not as organized a path in terms of thinking about who might I just let know informally that I was interested in joining a corporate board. And then as Mary said, making sure that you have a board bio, but probably more importantly, thinking about what's your elevator pitch in terms of the 3 to 5 skills or set of experiences that you would bring to a board. And then also starting with yourself and asking yourself, why do I want to join a corporate board? And really asking yourself, what's your motivation? What do you bring to the table? What do you hope to get out of an experience? And what's unique about your profile that might really add value to a board? And I also heard someone say once that people spend a lot of time on their board resume. And that's important to really think about how is that different from a regular career or job resume, but actually pay attention to your LinkedIn profile because people are super busy, and what they will do is they'll just cut and paste the link to your LinkedIn profile and then maybe forward that on if your name comes up. So I thought that was a really good tip. And in terms of how I got my first board position, which was a private board, was that I happened to be speaking on a panel with somebody who later got an outreach from an executive search firm asking for somebody who might fit a particular profile. And this friend referred me as one of, I'm sure, many candidates. So it's not to say that speaking on panels will lead to board roles, but I think the the lesson I learned there is more that you never know where and when an opportunity might arise. And just being out there in a thoughtful and intentional way, we obviously can't spend all our time doing that, could lead to opportunities. And then in terms of public company board roles, one is work related. So you might be in a position where your company needs you to be on a particular seat. And so I was fortunate to be asked by our CEO to be one of our 2 board representatives to a particular company. And in the other situation, it was also a case of I just happened to know somebody who I had been attending a chief legal officer dinner series and would occasionally, when asked, help to co-moderate the dinner. And then the person organizing the dinner also happened to organize dinners for CEOs. And at one of the CEO dinners, a CEO reached out and asked the organizer for potential names for her board. And so I think that's how that led to that board seat.
I think both Mary and Marie share how important it is to actually sow a lot of different seeds and different paths. And I think that's really the lesson for us so far. So I know we'll dig a little bit more. And I have heard your history and your story, which is very interesting, Joanne. So would you share your experience and some of those things from your work and other, I know, in community that's really helped you, I think, raise your profile that led you to your seat, your first seat?
Thanks, Lily, and I too would like to thank Direct Women and thank all of you. Thank you for your moderating, and Marie and Mary, it's great to be with all of you. So in some regards, I was much less, I was more like Marie than Mary. I was intentional at a period of time in my life, but then I thought I had aged out. And so I had created this board ready profile and I'd circulated it and really nothing had happened. And I kind of given up on it. I wasn't thinking about it. When basically, somewhat like Marie, serendipitously, someone called out of the blue, a CEO who I knew, and I hadn't ever said to him, I'm interested in a board seat, called me and said, are you interested in being a member of our board? And I'm like, that could work. So in some regards, I felt very fortunate about it. So part of the reason that I feel like I have a slightly different perspective, but maybe something useful to offer to groups of people in the audience who are thinking about how to get on a board. There are a variety of strategies. One is sort of the intentional way that Mary went, and you get out there and you're really clear about it, and that means your name is out there, and that's really helpful. But I think what I would say is of the 2 boards that I am on, they are both very intentionally not the search firm kind of place. And so one of the things that happened, like Marie, it's who you knew that somebody got asked, and so your name gets raised. So I think the message that I would say, Lily, is that there are sort of 2 ways about it. One is sort of the strategic, I would like to be on a board, and I hope we get back to the point that Marie raised. I think it is important for you to say, why do I want to be on a board? Why do I want to be on this board? We'll talk about that later. But one is the strategic effort. The other is just putting yourself out there in places where you might get seen by people who can make a referral.
And I think, Joanne, like for you share a little bit about that experience, right? It's not just really you going out there and attending things. You actually are a leader in your organization at the university, and you were viewed as a leader, and you help to bring and bridge many different, points of view. So some of those experiences, I think, regardless of whether it's in a nonprofit, university, or in a corporate setting, or in a law firm, those are the skill sets. And I know we'll get into it in terms of how do you share your value add. So maybe can you talk a little bit about that? And then I'm going to go to the next question.
Sure, I'll be really brief about it. I think that's exactly right. I can't pretend to have ever been a CEO. Clearly, I know how to read corporate and business documents, but I've never been a CEO. So if I'm going to try to pretend to bring the same value to a board as someone who was a CEO, I'm going to fail. But I think your point is well taken, that when you develop as a leader, and so when you take your 24 hours and try to decide how to spend them wisely. Position yourself in a place where people can see the leadership that you bring. And if that's not happening on a nonprofit, for instance, then maybe you want to move to a different one, because I think I was literally called by a university colleague who'd seen me present to the board of trustees. And I didn't know anything about a real estate investment trust. Interestingly, for those of you who might know it, both of the boards I'm on are real estate investment trusts. I now know a lot about that. I don't know that I would ever wind up being a desirable candidate for the board that Marie is on. So at some level, that was serendipitous, but it started just by a person thinking, this is a woman that I think could bring some value to the board. Her perspective, her integrity, she asked good questions. And I wasn't doing it in order to interview for a board spot.
And I think that leads really to my next question is, how does a person of color or from a diverse background, you know, Marie or Mary, feel free to jump in, affect your approach to leadership and conveying that, and allow you to bring something extra to the boards that you currently sit on? Maybe start with Marie and then Mary. I'm just curious because I think that's really important because even once you're on a board, you have to continue to show value, and you and all of us, you know, who are interested, women of color, bring something special to the table.
Yes, so I would start with the business and to really emphasize that making boards increasingly diverse is a business imperative, starting with your customers, your employees, and your shareholders. Each group of those really needs and demands that in some cases. And so as a person of color, I think in terms of how that's affected my leadership is, it's not something I think about every day or every minute, but it is something that I feel has made me more aware and more inclusive, or try to be more inclusive in terms of how I interact with others, how I lead teams, how I think about building teams and trying to influence others. And it all comes back to the reason, like, what is your company's purpose, its mission? And I would think that pretty much every company, regardless of what industry or mission it has, can benefit from a business perspective on increasing diversity on its board, and as well as thinking about the variety of stakeholders it needs to interact and work with.
Thank you, Marie. Mary, I know you have one easy fix or a recommendation for companies who want to increase diversity on the boards. Can you share a little bit more about that? And I know, Joanne, you probably want to jump in as well. So.
Yeah, actually, the one board I'm on, PTC Therapeutics, I think Joanne's story is kind of illustrative of this as well. She partially got on her board because someone had seen her interacting and presenting to the board of trustees at the university. And so one of the things that I think helps for, in some respects, to get on a board is having access to the board so that board members can see you. And obviously, women lawyers, particularly those who are general counsel, they get that experience of presenting to the board at the board meetings. And at PTC Therapeutics, they've started this program, mentoring roundtables, where all the board members host these sessions on different topics. And actually, I've hosted some on leadership and how to get on a board for some of the senior executives all around the globe at PTC Therapeutics. So it's giving people at the company access to the board members, which a lot of them otherwise would not have, which I think is a great program and something easily that companies could do.
Thanks, Mary. And Joanne, I know you wanted to also share. you have thought about this quite a bit.
Yeah, I have, because I think that, we all know what has kept us out of the boardrooms for years. It's the group think. They look around and they're looking for somebody who looks like them. And so they just replicate themselves. So I think, Mary used the word in answer to her first question about her intentional efforts to get on a board. I think boards have to be intentional, because if they're not intentional, I think it makes it really hard. I think Mary's exactly right that a lot of your general counsel have already gotten their foot in the water, but many of the people that would like to be on boards don't have that opportunity. I've been in a university board meeting, but I've never been in a corporate board meeting. So I couldn't sit there and pretend that I knew what was going on. But what I will say, one of the things that you asked us to think about, and I hope I'm not getting ahead of you in answering this low-hanging fruit question, but I think that one of the things that once you get a board that recognizes that the imperative of diversity is now, and that they really, as Marie said, there's a business case for this. This isn't just us saying it's something we'd like. I think shareholders are really demanding an attention to a broader array of things these days. So one easy low-hanging fruit, expand the board. Expand the board by even just one. And so I will say that, interestingly, the first board I went on, I took a seat that had been vacated by someone. The second board I went on, they expanded the board because they wanted the board to have a place for someone that obviously hadn't happened so far. So I think that is one thing that boards can do, that lets them realize I'm really not a threat. And maybe I even have something to add. So I think that if we can, in our course of our professional lives, talk to CEOs and board members and just sort of advance these kinds of suggestions, it may not advantage us, but it may advantage one of our sisters.
Great, thank you, Joanne. I'd like to turn to, how do you narrow the focus of a board search? I know a lot of the attendees here, maybe they are in the middle of a board search process or thinking about it as a future career for them to even think about. How do you even start, Mary? So how did you go about even narrowing the companies or the types of industry? What did you look for as part of your 3-year intentional journey?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what Marie talked about. You have to really be honest with yourself and say, what value am I going to add to a board? You shouldn't approach your board search to say, oh yeah, I'd really like to be on a board. They should be lucky to have me. No, you have to know your value proposition, and you have to know where you're going to add value. And for me, I think it's true probably of a lot of lawyers. In my legal career, I dealt with a lot of highly regulated industries. I was in insurance, healthcare, and so just at the top, that's something that I think I add value on, and highly regulated industries. And then also I had a background in corporate governance, so that was another area. So at least for me, that's how I kind of narrowed it down at the top, thinking about what value would I add.
Thanks very much, Mary. Marie, I wanted to ask you in terms of when you think about the network, you have many different types of networks. Are there certain networks that you think, really for our folks to focus on to activate are better than others, or, they should really think more intentionally about that? For example, getting out there and being visible. Are there certain groups? Are there certain networks and strategies to even communicate to your connections that you would be interested in being considered or thought about if people get a call for folks as potential candidates?
Sure. I would put the networks in a couple of different buckets. One could be board and governance networks. So I think as Mary said, NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors. There are other, there's a whole slew of them, right? Latino Corporate Directors, Executive Leadership Council, there's Ascend Pinnacle for AAPI, there's Women Corporate Directors, just Athena Alliance, obviously Direct Women, and you can't do all of them. And so I would really suggest picking and choosing what works for you and what you think works for your schedule, geography, value. Some of them are pay to play. Then there's what I would consider more your informal networks. So think about maybe outside counsel, if you're in-house, that you work with, who often are in a position to work with companies of all sizes and stages of maturity that might be looking to build out their board or perhaps fill vacancies. It could be venture capital, private equity, investment bankers. And so just informally letting people know that you're interested and be ready with a short answer of why you're interested, and also be ready for the inevitable question of, well, tell me the sort of company that you'd be interested in and why. And then finally, I would say, hopefully all of you have your version of a kitchen cabinet, or what I think of as it could be friends, family.
Girlfriend posse. Girlfriend posse.
Oh yeah, I love that. Yeah, and it's probably people not necessarily in your current company or organization, but maybe it's former colleagues, former bosses, former subordinates, family members, whatever. Those are people that you turn to for advice, or to whom you might give advice, and just let them know that you are interested and open, and just a few words on why and what you bring.
Lily, can I ask Marie a follow-up question?
Yes, please, Joanne. We want this interactive.
Thank you. Marie, could you say a word or two more about bucket number 1, the NACD, and all of those other sort of board kinds of connections? How would a person who, I'm thinking about myself, like I hadn't even really heard of most of those entities until I became a board member. How would I choose? And in particular, I guess what I'm interested in your thoughts are, do you think that people ought to be thinking about their own substantive expertise? Or is that actually not that important? And so what you should be looking for are the things that resonate with your interests, even if not your substantive expertise.
That's a great question. I would say a little bit of both. Let me tackle the latter first. So on the substantive expertise, just being realistic, boards, in my view, when they're looking to fill seats, often want a certain profile. And if you think about also how the work gets done on a board, it often gets done in committees. So sometimes they're looking for a very specific skill set. Audit committee, so financial literacy, financial expertise is the most common example. And also because the fact that audit committees meet the most frequently and often take the most time, sometimes people are less willing or don't prefer to join an audit committee if they have a choice. Like they might prefer to join other committees. So if you have that financial literacy or expertise and you could be on the audit committee or eventually an audit committee chair, that's really helpful. Nowadays, with things like cybersecurity, climate change, the SEC's new proposed rules, companies are going to need to start disclosing whether their boards have that kind of expertise. So if you happen to have that, that's one of those hot fields that could be helpful. And so I wonder, your question made me think about something else too. So there are all sorts of director education events. So Stanford, Harvard, Penn, Northwestern, I'm sure there are more that I'm not thinking of, offer director education institutes. And so that could be a place not just for education, but also for networking, because usually the people attending those are directors. And so, sorry, I forgot your first question, Joanne.
The first question was just if you're new to this and you're trying to take your advice about bucket number 1, about these various organizations to which to participate, recognizing you can't do them all. I was just sort of wondering how one might choose.
Oh, so I personally would think about, where are you in your board discovery journey? Are you very new to governance, or are you, for instance, a GC who has been in the boardroom a lot, who basically knows the issues, who could probably give some of these seminars, and then you might not really find it worth your while to attend some of those. But if you're new to the field, or if you're new to corporate or governance, it might be really helpful and useful for you, for instance, to join a local chapter of NACD or go to a director's education institute. I think the other thing to think about is, even if maybe it's not, you don't necessarily need the substance, although I find that I always learn and see a different angle or nuance in going to these, is the ability to meet new people is always a benefit. Now, you have to just weigh that against what else you have going on in your life and your time.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Sorry. Thank you, Lily.
No, thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Marie. I think that raises really a good point, which is, for example, NACD, if you're going to actually participate, don't just sign up and just sit there and just attend the program. I actually know somebody who became a leader within NACD, raised his profile, he's a diverse candidate, to a point where other directors that might be open to knowing open seats, thought of him. And eventually, over the years, he actually landed a position as a result of his leadership position within, NACD. So that's just an example of, how an intentional, like Mary, initiative can lead to a board seat. And again, I think for us, really for the audience here, is there's no one path. There are many different paths, and understand who you are first, and also understand what you bring to the table. So that leads me really to a very important point, is how do you sell your own value proposition? And where do you start, Mary? So I know you're very intentional, very organized. So you had coaches to help you. You did everything to put your, board bio in the best shape. Direct Women is helping you, but you're already there. So how did you really come up with the best value proposition, for the different companies that you interviewed with, in order to be the most success, bring most success in your board search? Any tips for us?
Yeah, well, I'm going to assume that a lot of the people who are watching, since this is a Direct Women seminar, are lawyers. And I guess what I would say as an initial matter, sort of take off your lawyer hat for a minute, because if you were looking for a GC role or other in-house role, or even a partner at a law firm, you obviously would be talking about a lot of the legal skills that you bring, and those skills are valuable in the boardroom, but you have to package them differently. So like, for instance, I was actually at an NACD program last week with recruiters, and I'm sure we'll talk about recruiters versus networking later, but this recruiter said, like, example, a lot of GCs and other lawyers have worked on M&A deals. So if you were interviewing for a lawyer spot, you would probably talk about more of the details of how you put together a deal, some of the skills you bring to it. But if you're using M&A as a valuable skill for the boardroom, but the way you would package it to appeal to be a board member is more focusing on, did you have a role in the integration after the merger, or some of the other kind of strategy things involving the merger, which most lawyers do, because I think any good GC or other lawyer, the value you bring to your company is, sure, your legal skills, but you're a business partner. So I think you need to think about those business partner skills that you bring. And for some people, I think it's a little hard for them to wrap their head around, oh, you mean they don't care that I was voted one of the best lawyers in the country? No, they don't care if you're applying for a board seat. You have to, you have the skills. You just need to package them differently in terms of serving as a board member.
I think that's really an important point, Mary, which is how to use the skill sets and the experience in industry, right? And your ability to bring that business acumen through your past experience. And, you know, Joanne, in your university as a leader, overseeing this very complex organization, dealing with politics, dealing with budget matters, dealing with personalities, and very tough things that you had to deal with as a leader at the university setting. You translate, I would assume, you know, people, even though you didn't have to prove it because you already proved it by showing that in the setting, but really at the end of the day, that's packaging that, which is really what Marie had said also, which is, what is the value proposition from a business partner to be able to bring to the boardroom, to the CEO, essentially, to be a trusted board member, so that you're not a lawyer. They already have lawyers, right? They have outside counsel, they have inside counsel. So how do you package yourself as a business leader who brings a unique set of skills and understanding different industries? So,
Did you pitch
Joanne.
that? Okay. I actually, Lily, think that there's two pieces of that. One is sort of the ability, as you said, not to come to the meeting as a lawyer, but to come with good judgment, which I think is either something people are blessed with or not. So part of what I think you want to do if you're interested in a board seat is just sort of have the reputation of having good judgment, which not everybody does. I also think that it's important to say this horrible thing, which is fit, because that's the thing that has kept us out of so many opportunities for a long time. That someone looked at me and said, I don't think she fits. She doesn't fit my image of. But at the same time, I think the reality is that that's true. It's a small club. These boards aren't big. And they're really not looking to welcome someone that's going to make their lives miserable. And so I think that one of the things I think is really important for us to fine tune, not just to be good board candidates, but in life, is to be known as asking good, hard questions respectfully. And so I think that's the kind of thing, like, you know, just to be the passive potted plant. So I guess his name was Brendan, somebody that used that phrase. You don't want to be that. They don't need a potted plant. What they want is someone that is going to bring something, but is not seem to be disruptive. So I think that part of what is important as I speak to people who think they want to do this is the kinds of things I think you're hearing from all of us that are the kinds of things that will serve you well professionally, not just in an effort to get to be a board member. So that the kinds of things that will have people think highly of you and feel really comfortable throwing your name in the hat. Those are things that you don't necessarily do intentionally. They're the kinds of benefits from the way in which you live and operate and thrive as a lawyer. So I think that my value added to me is that I am different. And I think that the people on the boards would say that I bring a different perspective. I'm like, why do we do it that way? But I don't say it accusingly as if only stupid people would have picked that. But I like to think that there is eventually the recognition that a diverse board, as I think Mary said earlier, you know, like Marie, the business case for diversity has been clearly made. You just have to be the kind of person that people believe will advance that goal. And that's a professional challenge that we have, I think, separate from trying to get on a board.
I think those are two really good tips, you know, and practical takeaways. One is to continue to build a reputation and brand, right? And then number two is to be able to cultivate those relationships with people who are going to feel comfortable to put your name out there on your behalf, right? That's really, those are two good things for us to focus on. So once you get an interview, you know, and I think about Marie and even Joanne, even from your perspective, you're interviewing potential candidates, and Mary as well. So I'd love to hear, for example, what are some of the questions and things that a board candidate, if you get an invitation to go meet the board? So Marie, you know, you have had a different, you know, from private to corporate in different settings. What are some of those things that our audience here when they prepare to go into a board to be interviewed by either a panel or individual board members, what should they think about, and what are some of those questions that you've seen, whether people are successful or not, because you've also been on the other seat helping to fill boards?
Yes. I'll group it into a couple of different categories. First, the very practical and logistical. One is if you are currently in an operating role, is there a potential conflict of interest? So nobody wants to waste time, you or the organization, if there's a conflict. Like if you work for a competitor or there's a potential conflict and you'll need to recuse yourself a lot. So think about that up front. And sometimes it's very clear and other times it's not so clear. Second, are dates. So same thing there, right? You could be the fabulous candidate that fits that role, but you have just impossible calendars that don't work. So practically speaking, I'd get that cleared up front. And then in terms of getting more into the actual substance of the interviews, first, one thing for me that's really, really important is the CEO. Like if I'm looking at a company, who is that CEO? What is that person's values for me is really critical. Values, character, what's their vision, their strategy, how are they executing, what are they like as a leader of an organization. So to me, that is super important in terms of wanting to be on a board is, do I believe in that CEO? And
Maureen,
then,
do you feel like you have a personal connection with the CEO or just professional?
I think it's
I
important.
adore both of my CEOs. That's why I'm asking. I have enormous respect for them professionally, but I also adore both of them, and that made the decision even easier. So I'm just asking whether I'm just rare in this instance, or whether you think that's an important component.
To me personally, I do, because professionally, obviously, but then I enjoy working with people if I know a bit more about them personally and who they are, their backgrounds, their values. And I know that everybody's different on that front, but to me, I think that helps.
Sorry to interrupt. I can't
No,
help
I
it.
think that's a really great point. And especially, when you think about a board seat, it's not just a 1-year commitment. You're really, thinking about kind of a 10-year commitment. I mean, 5 to 10 years that in order to really be meaningfully a part of a board and understanding the business and really being, I would say, valuable to the CEO or to the rest of your board members. So it's really a big commitment. It's not just I'm just getting the seat for today for a year, because they're also evaluating. As Joanne said, it's a small group of people. Do you feel comfortable having difficult conversations with the CEO, right? Because the board needs to, in times of crisis, have those difficult conversations. And is this a CEO who you believe will listen to the board? So I think those are some really valuable considerations.
Mary, I didn't mean to ignore you, and I'm going to stop interrupting, but I just wanted, because I didn't want you to feel like I was ignoring you. I'm interested in your thoughts about that question about the personal versus the professional. Sorry, Lily.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you,
I think it's true because there's and Marie mentioned this as well, there's the component of substantively, do you have the experience that they're looking for on the board and will you add value? But a large part of the interviews for boards, going back to your question, Lily, is the cultural fit. And they need to, and your point is well taken also, Lily, that this is a pretty lengthy commitment. It is about 5 or 10 years. I think the average length of board service is 8 years. It is very much frowned upon and not done for you to join a board and then think you can quit a year later. You cannot do that. So you really need to know, do I want to spend the next possibly 10 years with these people? And they're saying the same about you. So yeah, I think to Marie and Joanne's point, not only the CEO, but also the other board members, are they people that you want to spend time with for that length of time? And they're looking at you. Will Mary fit in? Will she add value? And we've talked about without being disruptive. There's like a famous phrase, you disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that's what most boards are looking for. So to answer your question, Joanne, yeah, I think you need to have some kind of connection with the culture of the company, the CEO, and your fellow board members.
I think I want to ask you, what are some of the questions then, if I'm a board candidate going into an interview, what are some of the good questions really to get to the heart to help you decide, to help me decide, right? I'm speaking on behalf of some of our audience members to see whether this really is the right board for me or the right opportunity at the right time. What might be some of the ways that you have or that you've seen other people successful in probing to better understand the fit, to understand better the opportunity, right?
Yeah. I think it's really important to understand what's going on with the company at that point in time. Where is it? Is it in the midst of a crisis? Is it on a growth phase? Is it on some kind of transformation journey? And is that something you want to be a part of? Is that something you can add value to? And then how, to me, it's also really important the dynamics in the boardroom. And what I mean by that is, like any other group, a board has its interactions, and there are people who are very powerful on the board. Often those might be the chair and committee chairs, but often it's not necessarily that. How are decisions really made? How does the CEO interact with the board? What is the CEO's relationship with the board? So for example, you may not want to join a board where it seems like the board is not engaged. The board members don't seem to really know each other, be involved, really want to spend time and invest. Is it something like where it looks like the CEO and the leadership team is trying to, quote, manage the board? Or is it something where there's a real true interaction and respect for each other? And that can be hard to ascertain, especially in a couple hours of interviews. So trying to get at it perhaps by having individual conversations with people. Maybe you can ask to speak with some of the key leaders on the management team. You can talk to people outside. It's amazing what you can learn by asking questions in an appropriate way of people.
Thanks, Marie. I wanted to ask, once you get on a board, how do you think about being successful, right? Because it's a 5 to 10 year, 8-year average. How do you, so Joanne, you sit on 2 boards, as you said, you didn't know anything about REITs. So how do you learn the business? What's the best way or lessons learned when you think about it so that our potential board members who are in the audience can really learn from you? And then a second part of that question is, how do you become viewed as an influencer, somebody who actually is not just a seat in the boardroom? So do you need to find mentors with or sponsors even within the boardroom? So the first is really the education to get yourself really up to speed. What are some of the ways you do it? And then second is, how do you help yourself to thrive and be successful once you're in the boardroom?
I'm going to take the second question first because it's shorter. I didn't really seek sponsors within the board. I tried to take the lesson about, you know, mothers-in-law at the wedding and wear gray and don't talk for the first year. So I really just wanted to learn. And so I wanted to not be viewed as someone who didn't know what she was doing. And so I was very cautious. But I'm glad you asked me this question, because I want to say something that will be really startling to our audience, I think, in terms of the answer to your first question. How did I approach this? I sucked up every piece of information. And here's the point that I would make. Honest to God, Lily, I would do this for free. I am well compensated as a board member, but I want to say, unless you start this when you're like 50, it's unlikely you're going to live long enough for this actually to pay off. I mean, you know, like, it's decent, but like, you know, don't think you're going to actually retire on this. It probably pays for a vacation, but you have to love what you're doing. I actually find this totally enjoyable, and I would do it for free. And so for that reason, it didn't ever feel like work. And so I was able to learn the business because it was interesting. You know, so like, I read as much as I could. I asked as many questions as I could. I was quiet for a while until I really felt like I knew what I was talking about. But at least on my first board, I have now risen to chairing, nominating, and governance. And, you know, and I'm really proud of that fact. Because it suggests some confidence that the board has in me. It didn't happen overnight, because I didn't even know what a real estate investment trust was when I joined the board. But I think you have to, it goes back to the question that Marie raised earlier about like why you want to be on a board, and Mary raised, why do you want to be on a particular board? I think those are really important questions. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't do that all that thoughtfully, but from my perspective now, I would say to our audience, those are important questions. Because if you're not interested in doing the work, in engaging in the work of the business and really enjoying it, it's going to be a slog. So for me, I learned a lot, and then I feel as if I tried helpfully to take that and not pretend that I'm the CEO. You know, like, I've never run a REIT, but I can ask good questions, and I would like to think that the time in paid off.
And I think that's really a very excellent point, because it's not just your fellow board members who are observing your board service, not just the CEO, but also other executives to see, does this board member actually read the materials and come prepared to the meeting, right? So that's very basic. Gosh, we're 6 minutes away. So I'm going to ask one last question, and I'm going to ask, you know, the whole panelists really to share, what advice do you have for other women of color who are currently engaged in this board process, right? And are looking to best position themselves as a potential candidate. There's some great takeaways here, but, you know, one last thought, and maybe we start with, you know, Joanne, Marie, and Mary, and if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Sure. I think that one piece of advice I would offer is find someone who's in the position you'd like and ask for a bit of their time to find out how they got there and what they might be able to do to help. That is the way in which you learn how to get to that next level. And so I think that's the piece of advice that I would offer. Just find somebody that holds a board seat in a place that you think you'd like, and just pick their brain as much as they'll allow you to do so.
Marie. And then I think we also have time for one more question after that. And then I'm going to start with Mary after that. So what would be the one piece of advice, you know, for our audience here in terms of when you think back to what led you to be successful in getting a board seat, and also success in being viewed as a valuable member of the board?
Be open to opportunity, network intentionally, and make sure you have a good LinkedIn.
That's a great advice. So Mary, I wanted to, you know, I'm not going to end with you, but I'm going to end this particular question with you, and then also ask one last follow-up with everybody.
Well, I guess I would just say, as an initial matter, this was hard for me too. I kept thinking, oh, you know, there's so many people who have been CEOs and CFOs of public companies. Maybe I really can't be a board member. I guess the best advice I would say is, yes, you can. You bring a unique perspective as women of color. That's exactly why you should be on a board. And then learn as much as you can and talk to as many people as you can, because I think for the most part, people want to help. And all you need to do, which is also hard for me, is to ask for help. So.
Great. Thanks so much. I'm going to ask one last question. What is the one thing that you wish you could have done earlier or differently, Mary, to create a more success, even more success than you have? And
well, I think, yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because I think we've been kind of, this whole conversation has been directed to probably women who are right now board ready to get on a board. And I think if there's some less experienced people or people earlier in their careers on the call, I guess what I would say is think about it earlier than you might have otherwise, and ensure that you are board ready. And ways to get board ready are to learn the finances, learn how a balance sheet works. Perhaps get outside your comfort zone. If you're asked to do something that's not 100% legal, but is part operational or part strategy, that will help your board journey. So those are some tips that I wish I had done more of earlier in my career.
right. Thank you, Mary and Marie and Joanne. Just maybe 10 seconds of one thing differently that you wish you or recommend people do differently to better prepare themselves in the future. Maybe Marie and then Joanne, you have the last word and we'll close.
Think about yourself as more than a lawyer, and how you position those skill sets in terms of what you can then bring to the boardroom.
Thank you, Marie. Joanne?
Never too early to start. I started this in my early 60s. It was already too late. Like, whatever age you are, start tomorrow.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. You are just a wonderful group of legal leaders and corporate directors. We're so proud for you to take time. We're so honored to speak with us today, and we greatly appreciate all the insights. Mary, Marie, Joanne, thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you all for listening. Stay tuned for details on the Direct Women's other upcoming programs. And please remind you to take a few minutes, give us some feedback about our panel today. Farewell and take care, everyone.
Thanks, Lily.
Thank you.
Thank you.